So well, so we'll just continue with our how we tried to in the previous sort of thing. We arrived at how Allama Iqbal tried to see a sort of restitution of a method which is not having some intersections with the scientific method, but there are differences. Without maybe elaborating upon how best we can just reinstate an empirical method which is in consonance with the Quranic method, but simultaneously being ambivalent or detached from the scientific method, which is dominated by empirical and positivistic approach of the 20th century. So in this context, what I should say, the role of Imam Ghazali, early Muslim theologians, Ibn Rushd and Greek scholastics, the argument which has been presented. In the same league now, in the context of this thing, there are a couple of few observations of Allama Iqbal regarding Immanuel Kant and Imam Ghazali. So before we have to understand positions of Imam Ghazali and Immanuel Kant, so we have to first ground them in their own respective traditions before we can just draw parallels between them. Even though the centuries, maybe the times of Imam Ghazali, he died in maybe 1111, and maybe Immanuel Kant was in the late 17th century, his influence and continued to 18th and 19th century. So you can say the gap is between 600-700 years, but we can have interesting parallels which Allama Iqbal tries to elude, and which we will try to just somehow just embank upon or continue. So there can be interesting parallels, there can be interesting convergences, and there can be divergences as far. So what they aim to achieve and what they arrived at in the process, the end results may have seemingly what I should say commonalities, but their motivations or their prior assumptions may be entirely different. So first of all, I'll just try to see if you want to see in that sense. So Imam Ghazali can be seen in the way his coming. How can you see it? Is that before Imam Ghazali, there has been Ibn Sina, there has been Farabi, there has been Kindi, there has been Ibn Hazm. So there have been whole scholarship of theologians and philosophers and all sort of argumentation which was post-Aristotelian in that sense. The only thing is that how Muslim theologians tried to just wed the Aristotelian elements, particularly Ibn Farabi, how he tried to make somewhat as far as role of reason and revelation, how he tried to find sort of middle ground in the sense of sensate intellect, how he tried to introduce how he tried to see revelation in consonance with rationality, and including both Aristotelian and Platonic elements, or Neoplatonic school, how Neoplatonic school was rehabilitated, or it was synchronized with the idea of revelation or worship. So there were four before the coming of Imam Ghazali. There have been theologians which were also called Mutakallimun. There was a Batiniya order which believed in the, what I should say, who considered, for example, an infallible Imam as an institution. There were philosophers who regarded themselves as exponents of logic and demonstrations, and there were Sufis and mystics. So among these 3-4, what I should say, schools, you can say Imam Ghazali, or there were materialists also, which were called Dahriyas or naturalists in that sense, and naturalists also. So among these three, what I have said, Imam Ghazali tried to uniquely maneuver his own position. So in that sense, you can say what I should say. The important thing of Imam Ghazali was how he, for example, the role of Greek logic or Aristotelian logic, which was previously considered as anathema as far as religious anathema in some sense. So role of Imam Ghazali was how to Islamicize Greek logic in that sense. So you can say he just somehow how he Islamicized Greek logic. You have to study. There are various works of his regarding logic and mantik and theology and various works to those effects, which was continued from Farabi and the schools he had left, which not only includes Maqasid al-Falasfa, Tahafat al-Falasfa, elements of Greek logic, or working on how Ibn Hazm also tried to just do things. And also Avicenna's commentary on what I should say theologians or Kalam. So where he tried to see what I should say, what are the Maqasid al-Falasfa, in trying to just maybe logicizing the teachings of Quran, that Quran logic is no way alien to the spirit of Quran. He tried to show with syllogistic reasoning peculiar verses where you could trace the Quran, you could make semblance of Quran in logic. So there were maybe theologians to that effect who just opposed this invocation or this attempt, but the role of Imam Ghazali has been he was successfully he was successful in motivating or in convincing his fellow ulamas to this viewpoint. And in that sense, he was saying that logic is a criteria by which we can distinguish his mean true and false knowledge. And what I should say, he who does not master logic among schools cannot know what's reliable knowledge. And logic does not contradict Islamic thing and Islamic sciences in particular. And how various scholastics, whether it was metaphysics, which is normally called ulumul ilahiyat in the Islamic discourses, or whether it was jurisprudence, whether it was philosophy, whether it was ethics, and a whole host of sciences. So what the important point in Ghazali's is important point, which we see in Ghazali, is how he classified knowledge. So maybe before Ghazali, I can say before grounding Ghazali, it will be better to say Kindi, this Farabi, Ibn Sina in the and even post Ghazali also Shadruddin. So there have been whole scholastics, the notion how we can classify sciences in general and particular, and the notions of hierarchy of sciences, how we can place one science vis-a-vis other science, how we can see theology in terms of ethics, how we can see physics and mathematics, how we can see metaphysics and philosophy. So the hierarchy of sciences and whole grounding of sciences. So this was an important project, not only of Imam Ghazali, preceded by Ibn Sina. So here I want to ground. There can be some similarities between Immanuel Kant and Ghazali, which I'll just try to see how we can see that way. So in the whole modicum of sciences, so this has been important endeavor of theologians, Muslim theologians, and Imam Ghazali being a significant figure, to ground different sciences, and to see where the proper role of falsafa is there, proper role of natural science is there, proper role of mathematics, arithmetic, music, so whole host of science, and even juristical judgments, how we can judge things, for example, and how we can use syllogistic reasoning or reasoning or logic to that effect. For example, to say the same thing is, for example, once, so you can, so in the way how legalists or jurists try to reason things, and the low role of logic in that thing, and low role of syllogistic reasoning post Aristotle, which included Ibn Sina also, which included philosophical theology, which is also called Kalam and Aqliyat. So you can have some premises which may be certain, and some which are uncertain, some are empirically driven, some are non-empirically driven, and in that you can have what I should say judgments, which may be, some are mubah judgments, some are certain judgments, some are allowed, some are not allowed. So you can have whole sort of a criteria how you can judge things. So what I am trying to say is that in trying to do all of whatever Imam Ghazali was doing, he found that maybe maqasid al-Falasfa, also in Tahawut al-Falasfa, he is wholesome critiquing Greek philosophy, philosophers, which includes particularly rationalists and those materialists. And the debates of whether the world is created or God, whether that debate, which you can see, you can see how Imam Ghazali saw philosophy not all encompassing. What are the aims or maqasid al-Falasfa? So the limitations of philosophy not being wholesome as an enterprise, it may not be useful or fruitful in that sense. So this is a general classification scheme. Maybe which is not entirely of Imam Ghazali, but taking just continuing with that tradition in that sense. But the only point is that Imam Ghazali, how he anchored philosophy, ilahiyat, logic, mathematics, grammar, and whole hosts of sciences in a particular hierarchy or a time or a table. You can see that here. So this was his synthesis, you can say Ghazalian synthesis. So now I am coming to so what Iqbal says. It cannot, however, be denied that Ghazali's mission was almost like apostate, like that of Kant in Germany. So what he said, for example, before coming to Ghazali, he is saying that Ghazali, finding no hope in analytical thought, moved to mystic experiences, and there found an independent content for religion. So this is a sort of appreciation also, as well as critique also in the Iqbalian scheme of things, how he sees mysticism also has some limitations, but somehow he could rehabilitate religion in some sense. Now we come back to this much is Ghazali seeing that. So Ghazali, so you can say so you can say how he sees. So now we come, and before coming to Kant, so you can see how Ghazali also had these. How he used peculiarly his syllogistic post-Aristotelian syllogistic reasoning in the classification of things, or in how we can arrive at judgments, which may be sound, which may be sometimes be empirically driven or non-empirically driven, and so on and so forth. So now come maybe 600-700 years, you come to Immanuel Kant. So Immanuel Kant also has been, you can say, the whole modicum of Western philosophy. You can say Kant being one of the influential figures in trying to see what I should say. Basically, the debate of so if we have, for example, if Ghazali cannot be seen in isolation, he have to be seen in the context of Ibn Sina, Farabi, Ibn Hazm, Al-Kindi, or post Ghazali. You can say there are a lot of figures to see. What I should say, Sadruddin Shirazi. So there's a whole scholarship of how we can ground metaphysics, philosophy, jurisprudence, logic, sciences, philosophy, and where we can place things, mathematics, and what's the hierarchy. We have to place what. So in the same sense, Kant, the incoming of Kant can be placed with the thing how the debate of rationalists and empiricists, which was the cusp. And before that, you had Locke. Before coming of Hume, you had Locke. You had Mill. You had Spinoza. You had what I should say. Berkeley, you had Leibniz, and you had a whole. So you can see it. He can also be seen in that tradition, in that continuation of that epitome. So what or you can also see how the role of Newtonian mechanics. So when we say Kant's famous terms that space and time are a priori constructions of space and time. They are space and time are a priori constructions. So he was very much impressed by the way results of Newtonian mechanics. So the debates of determinism and free will. So how on the one hand he found Newtonian mechanics, the determinism which supports Newtonian mechanics or which can be inferred from Newtonian mechanics. So given initial conditions, we can determine future and human rationality. So he found that contradicting with the idea of free will in that sense. So you can say Kant famously says that metaphysics is metaphysics possible. So metaphysics as a fundamental science is not possible. For example, so in page if you see page 184 of the book, Allama Iqbal also tries to come to the same point again and again. He is trying to say, for example, he is trying to say, it seems science can yes, he's trying to say what I should say. Science can afford to ignore metaphysics altogether and may even have believe it as a justified form of poetry, as Lang defined it, or as a legitimate play of grown-ups, as Nietzsche described it. So this notion of metaphysics, so this is another way of saying, Iqbal is also trying to say it twice. So in the sense, the whole point of Immanuel Kant was to prove the futility of metaphysics as a science, which is not possible, because the notions of, for example, notions of what I should say. So there are notions from Kantian episteme where, for example, he used notions of analytical judgments and synthetic judgments. So in the construction of knowledge, he found that what I should say. So there are so this is a term. So but I'll just say it. So synthetic a priori judgments. Judgments can make the existence of knowledge possible. So in the Ghazalian scheme of things, when we make judgments, whether they are posterior judgments or when we use syllogistic reasoning, and in the process you used empirical statements or non-empirical statements. So whether the ultimates of rationality can be grounded in analytical statements or not. So the role of Kant. So if you read a critique of pure reason, for him the role of arriving at certain statements from in an analytic fashion is not possible. So knowledge as such is can be possible in an not in an analytical sense, in the synthetic a priori sense. So in that sense, he made the role of geometry as a science, role of mathematics as a science. So what I want to say, the more you can ground it, the way Imam Ghazali or the schools or scholarship before him tried to ground mathematics, physics, philosophy in the different hierarchies, in the same way in the Kant's schemata of things, you can there is an underlying attempt to see philosophy, to see rational sciences, to see empirical sciences, and to see whole column of things. How is knowledge in general possible, or in that sense is metaphysics possible or not? So if so we can see in the Ghazalian scheme of things, metaphysics is possible through theology or through mysticism, but in the Kantian scheme of things, metaphysics as such is not possible. If you see it in the background discourses of empiricism and skepticism. The pertinent to mention is, for example, famously, if I want to make another parallels between Imam Ghazali and Immanuel Kant regarding causality. For example, Imam Ghazali did not see causality the way, for example, Imam Ghazali tried to see causality. One is known as habit, the other is known as. So he did not see causality in the sense of A is the cause of B or B is the effect of A. He says that there are some habits, repeated habits, and you can just make semblance of them with the causalities. Or there is something called sunnat, God, sunnat of Allah. You can see causality in that sense. You have not to see causality in the sense. So in the same way, if you see Immanuel Kant, he also tried to see causality not in the human way. So from empirical argumentation, Hume tried to see causality. He denied causality in that sense. But in the schemata of Kant, he tried to see causality, how he tried to rescue causality from synthetic posteriori assumptions. So you can see this is also another point between the two. And maybe if you say mind is not a tabula rasa, means some mind is not a separate tablet in which things are written on it, but for Kant, mind is an agency, or it's more like a cookie cutter, or what I should say, or a cutter which gives shape to that organized data or a clutter of reality, unorganized clutter or data of reality, and gives shapes by those categories of mind for space, time, or causality. So you have the Kant's famous categorical things, categorical imperatives. You can say it that way. So you can. So if you read, for example, Kant's Prolegomena of metaphysics, he has famously tried to justify how is pure mathematics possible, how is pure natural science possible, how is metaphysics possible in general, and how is metaphysics as a science possible. So in the process of trying to see things, so before coming to Kant and Ghazali, so here there is one point of Iqbal, for example. What I should say, So when he talks of that thought being finite and infinite, and both Ghazali and Imam Ghazali and Immanuel Kant somehow missed the point, and they try to give independent scope of religion. First, Imam Ghazali trying to find scope in mysticism when he found that philosophy has some limitations, and Immanuel Kant also when he tried to see critiquing metaphysics fundamentally in that sense. So in that sense, there come contradictions. He came to the notion of something called, when he wrote the groundwork on the metaphysics of morals, he came out with morality as independent of what I should say, transition from common rational to the philosophical moral cognition. So transition of metaphysics of moral to critique of practice. So you can have transition from moral philosophy to the metaphysics of moral. How he arrived at morality. He seeing limitations of what I should say, a reason to arrive at metaphysics as something fundamental, how he tried to find solace in trying to have metaphysics of morals as independent judgments. So in the same way, Kant trying to find somewhat. So maybe Iqbal is critiquing both of them in some sense, that they did not try to see thought in the fundamental sense. So role of thought in the in trying to just appreciate infinite. So there is one important point where he says, for example, thought is a whole in a dynamic self-expression, appearing to be to the temporal vision as a series of definite specifications which cannot be understood except by reciprocal preference. The larger whole is, to use Quranic metaphor, a kind of preserved tablet which holds up the entire undetermined possibilities of knowledge as a present reality, revealing itself in serial time as a succession of finite concepts appearing to reach a unity which is already present in them. So we can say in that sense, so if for Kant, mind is not a mind gives events uh, and it shapes the events. It's not a tabula rasa in that sense. It gives a meaning to the events, external events. But the thing is that so if in the so it may be terms in the Iqbal, in the Kantian sense, if space and time are a priori synthetic notions of so you can say it that way. So maybe it's a bit terse argumentation. So the point I want to emphasize is that how Imam Ghazali and how Immanuel Kant can be placed in two traditions and in two time zones, but arriving at something very important. Even though they arrived at something important, but how they arrived it, or what are their conclusions, what from that, what did they what should they construct, they may be at loggerheads with each other. That's a different point. The whole sort of post what I should say Kantian approach. So if you can trace all sorts of what I could say post Kantian discourse is responsible for whole sorts of philosophies. Or there is a wonderful article. There is an article, pernicious influence of Immanuel Kant, how it just led to agnosticism. It led to other things which are what I should say inimical to way Kantian, inimical to way the way Ghazalian way of looking at things, seeing things. So we can say so one thing is that so you can say so one is critiquing metaphysics in the Kantian sense. Is can there be critique of that critique in that sense? So in Arabic there is a word al falsafa wal istidlal la taw asl al haqq wal huda, means philosophy and rationalization give not truth neither guidance. So this is one argumentation. So logical can never contradict the metaphysical, and metaphysical can never be termed as illogical. So this is today's thing. So conclusions we want to arrive at in some sense. So in that sense, it's like today's lecture may be more in trying to see how we can rescue or recast metaphysics. No, and can there be an argumentation possible post-Kantian, which may have some inspiration from Ghazalian discourse? Can metaphysics be rescued or in some sense or recasted in some sense in the post-Kantian or post-Avicennian that framework in that sense? But which Iqbal is also trying to see, but in some he is trying to elude in that sense, in some sense. Yes. So now, now there have been a series of studies to that effect. For example, can what I should say there is a, if one author the ontological necessity of so ontological and ethical basis of the hierarchy of sciences. So can we ground things if you have two groundings of all sciences? So by the way, if you read a critique of pure reason and the way Imam Ghazali has also developed his way of, for example, judging things, the charts, the ontology, the arguments on the right hand side, the inferences, the syllogistic reasoning, and the judgments on the right hand side. In the same way, you can see Kant's those argumentation and the logic from the and the judgments. There you can see as if the style of Immanuel Kant is that of Imam Ghazali. So maybe one argumentation can be that post 16th, 17th century, maybe a lot of writers who had translated the books of these Arab and other scholars. So when they entered Europe, the style, that stylization might have been maybe even though Kant has not referred in that sense to being influenced by Imam Ghazali, but you can see the style seems to be similar. At least this is how I found it. So now question is, I'm jumping a bit. So from Imam Ghazali as a reference point, Immanuel Kant as one of the reference points. So can there be an ontological and ethical basis of the hierarchy of sciences? So or anatomy. So if I use another author, the anatomy of knowledge and ontological necessity of the first principles. In that sense. Or if I just quote, if I want to see Iqbal's Ishq in trying to just recast that metaphysics, which is not entirely logical or which is not entirely analytic or which is not in the sense Kantian, which tries to somehow do away with metaphysics when he says ilm be ishq ast tagutiya, ilm ba ishq ast lahutiya. So in that tablet which is unfolding, the divine tablet which is unfolding, where Kant might find responding to Hume's skepticism or empiricism, and maybe Kant and Ghazali are both trying to give solutions to skepticism in that sense, and Ghazali may be expanding on the Avicenna's experimentation, maybe Uh, so you can say there is an important comment which I want to say. The comment is, for example, so now I'm jumping a lot in that sense. Jumping in the sense that without actually trying to formulate or formalize how we can arrive at from a Kantian scope of metaphysics not being possible, or Kantian way of looking at morality, trying to find morality in moral judgments, an independent scope. How to rescue or recast metaphysics fundamentally in that sense. So maybe there have been series of studies to that effect, which I just try to pronounce. For example, to see how since logic has been instrumental in Ghazalian methodology, and you can say role of logic in Kantian way of looking at things also, and how we can arrive at those judgments from syllogistic reasonings, which was modified from Aristotle to Ibn Sina, and you can see Kantian judgments also, and Kant's categorical judgments, how we can have inferences or deductions thereof. So you can say what I should say. Can there be a sharp dividing line between logic ontology? And whether we say in Western scheme of thought, we say the metaphysics as such is no longer tenable or possible. So in that sense, there have been something called modal logic, which is developed for metaphysical systems. So there can be prayers which are exploring different logical systems having different metaphysical systems. So if I quote one of the 20th century logicians, maybe who says that Carnap, who says there is no connection between logic, ontology, and metaphysics, while people like Kripke and others, so you can say there is no sharp distinction between logic and metaphysics. So there can be something called theologic. A lot of people have tried to rescue in the modern discourses in that sense. So you can say the ontological necessity of being. For example, how is synthetic a priori knowledge possible? So you can rescue, for example, Imam Razi says mental forms constitute sound intellections that correspond to the extra mental world, and this can only occur if there is something subsisting in the extra mental world. Or Ibn Arabi says, seems to say, being the first writer to identify these things as they are in themselves within ontological realm, namely the distinct non-existence evolution in the divine knowledge. So being, existence, and ontology, where we should not say that physics should serve as de facto, it's the jurist educator, or it's going to judge all other sciences, whether philosophy, theology, and which has a strong empirical bias in that sense. So we can have something called ontology. So logic, does it have? So when we use logical relations, the way for Imam Ghazali, logic is neutral. But the thing is that in the post-Avicenne or Ibn Arabi's discourse, or you can, if being fundamentally, or if Heidegger insists being is fundamental, and in the being, Logic also has not to be seen merely as an instrumental in that sense. So we can say recover logic in that sense. So there is no sharp distinction between logic and metaphysics. So you can have the being as fundamental in that sense. So here I'll try to make in this what I have said. There are a couple of observations. For example, in relation to Iqbal. For example, what Iqbal says, during the last 500 years, religious thought of Islam has been practically. So he is being. So maybe the peculiar time Iqbal was living in, he was very much abreast with Islam is spiritually moving towards West. There is nothing wrong in the movement. Our only fear is so during all these centuries of our intellectual stupor, Europe has been seriously thinking on great problems in which philosophers and scientists of Islam have been keenly interested. Since the Middle Ages, when the schools of Muslim theology were completed, infinite advance has taken place in the domain of thought and experience. The extension of man's power over nature has given him a new faith. So here you can see, there can be a couple of questions in that sense. So the question is that maybe Iqbal may not have been aware of his own post-Abyssinian, post-Ghazali or post-Akbarian tradition. The way different schools, for example, in India, Farangi Mahal, maybe in Ottomans, in Cairo, Egypt, how role of these sciences, metaphysics, ontology, logic, mathematics, how in the classification scheme, how there was continuous people just continuously what I should say updated these knowledge schemes and these hierarchies in the continuous schemata of things. Maybe Allama Iqbal may not have been. He was more interested in. He was more trained in the Western way of looking at things. Maybe in the late stages, maybe people like what I should say Anwar Sheikh Kashmiri, he might have been, but he was a muhaddis in that sense. So original extant Islamic literature in the late Mughal period, which was not influenced by these Kantian and Humean and post-Enlightenment discourses. It has its own separate evolution. So even in that sense, you cannot this categorization of Iqbal cannot hold in that sense that world of Islam has been left behind. Maybe its ontology and its epistemology and the way hierarchy of science has been what I should say constructed in the Muslim discourses, the schemata of it. It did not get stagnated in that sense. It developed in some parallel ways, and those parallel ways they have not to be superimposed on other traditions. They have to be seen in their own contexts in that sense. So in that sense, you can say the rise and fall of these empires or thought processes. So it also has different meanings can be attached to those questions also. So here maybe just maybe stop here in the some sense with the thing that in the sense that if I want to summarize today's thing is that what we try to attempt is trying to see how Iqbal tries to see Imam Ghazali and Immanuel Kant in some semblance, and how they both one try to see fundamentally there are limitations of philosophy in some fundamental sense, and in the other case the veracity of metaphysics, is it possible or not, and one led to in case of Immanuel Kant, he tried to find moral judgments, metaphysics of morals. He tried to see things in that way. and how Imam Ghazali is trying to go for mysticism, and how Iqbal is trying to, in some sense, critique some elements of both of them, and trying to see things in that way, and try to see things in that way, and trying to develop a discourse, trying to see how we can see things in that sense. Yes. So my thing was that how we can just in today's things, maybe can we be metaphysics not being possible? Can we just revisit this statement, this Kantian statement, against a background 600 years back of Imam Ghazali in a different scheme? So can we revisit this question? Is metaphysics possible? Where logic and ontology and existence cannot be exclusive to each other in that sense. So hope you have tried to see what I can. Hope whatever you made sense, or whatever I did say to you. Thanks for listening.